Hey, just thought I would just warn you, the live stream is on and the audio is catching everything. Dayton, I saw the 6th grade doppelganger. I looked at that for a second. I wondered. Well, he's got a decent in it. Okay, well. Okay. Is that the source of maybe some tension? Okay. All right, hey, listen up. Pay attention. Hey, good afternoon. All right. Last week was a wash. It is what it is. But as I had told you last week, because I think most of you ended up at least in this class period. After last week, we need to play a little bit of catch up. We do still have some things that we've got to finish up before we call it quits for the semester. Now we've got 2 weeks before we get to finals week. It's going to go quick. I really believe that. And we're going to have to get some work done. We're going to have some production over these next 2 weeks. Your Alma grades are fully updated. I'm not asking you to get on there right now, but at some point you may. Are there any extras anywhere? No. It's 3?
Wait, yes.
All right. Hey, Sarah, take that and make me a couple copies. All right, I got a couple things to go over, so Sarah will make some copies for us. Anyway, your Alma grades, like I said, your Alma grades are updated. And when you get a chance to look at that, I think, there's going to be some of you that are going to think, okay, I'm in maintenance mode now. I've done pretty well. I'm pretty solid with where I am. Now I just need to maintain that. There's going to be some of you that are going to think, man, I really need to boost that. And then there's going to be some of you that are going to think, holy crap, all right, I need to boost that grade. All right, your voice may jump like that. All right, but here's the deal. Over these next 2 weeks, you're going to have something like 200 points that are going to be available to you for the taking. And all but 50 of that is going to be pretty straightforward stuff. Okay, we work on it in here. It's going to be stuff that we work on together, maybe stuff like what's in front of you right now, where this will be the last set of notes that we've got for the semester. These are pretty easy points. Not pretty easy, they are extremely easy. All right, follow these through. Should be an easy full credit grade for you. They're going to be things like that, or they're going to be things that you can use your notes on, a quiz or something like that. The only exception to that, just straightforward stuff, will be what's coming up on Friday, which is States and Capital. That shouldn't be a shock to anybody. I've been advertising that for a while now. Last week, if you were here, you were in this class, then you had time to review. All right, if you didn't use that, know what it is. Right? But over the course of the week, that needs to be something that you think about. If you're sitting in SPT, you might want to think about using some of that time to review for this. I've already told you what it's going to look like. We get a blank map. We'll have the state borders. Each state will have a number in it. If Indiana has the number 1 in it, then you would go to number 1 on the answer sheet, and you would write Indianapolis, Indiana. There will be a state bank. It'll be postal abbreviations. So you cross that off. The big thing is going to be capitals. Right? I'm one of those teachers who believes that it's important that our students know what the capital of our 50 states are. I think it's a basic expectation for students, so that's why we do it. So please be mindful that that's coming up on Friday, and something we need to be ready for. The moral of my story here, my long story here, is that if you need points, they're going to be available for you. Whether you take advantage of them or not, that's going to be entirely up to you. It's my sincere hope that we will be able to move through this, go into that last week in good shape. We don't take our final in here until Thursday of finals week. That means that Tuesday and Wednesday, let's be honest, I'm probably not going to see you. You're going to take your files and you're going to get the heck out of Dodge. And you know what? Why would you stay? Okay? Unless you've got those folks. Now, I have those folks. I would have been sitting here the whole time, right? All right, but when I see you guys on Monday of finals week, all right, we'll have, I'll give you the study guide. Wednesday or Thursday of next week, we'll have a couple of days in class to work. Monday is a full class day. We'll probably do some sort of review. Maybe it's a Kahoot or something like that. There'll be some extra credit tied into that, and then we'll get that final. Final exam, straight multiple choice, no writing. Your study guide is going to cover everything you might need to know. I don't think it's anything that I honestly don't think it's anything you need to stress about. So with that said, Jay, do you have a question? Yes. Yeah, let me talk about that real quick. Those video notes. We're not going to finish that. You should have gotten through question 14. All right, who needs today's? All right, we're not going to get through those, but if you were here and you did 1 through 14, you can turn those into the basket. Oh, well, I'll get to that. All right, if you weren't here, it's not going to hurt you. Yeah, I'm going to give you a few points of extra credit for it. Not going to hurt you if you weren't here on Friday. All right, those of you that were here, as long as you answered 1 through 14, put your name on it. We can put it in the basket before we go. All right, any other questions before we get started? All right, so if, look, I want to get through this thing. If I were to use one word to describe this last little bit of history that we're going to cover before the end of the semester, we're covering about 25 years here. So 1875, all the way up through 1900. If I were to use one word to describe that time period, it would be transition. We are definitely moving out of a period of sort of an older America. I feel like the Civil War is the end of this period of an older America. And then when we get back from break and we move into the 20th century, it's definitely a more modern style of country. So between them, we've got this transitional time period. And I think without a doubt, that transition is most easily seen in the area of industry. And that's kind of what Friday's video was all about. Now, we're moving away from the log cabins built in the frontier. Now we're building these giant steel skyscrapers that are so going to dominate cities like New York. And that's the reality of the new world, the new country, moving out of the old. So that's kind of what I want to look at. I mean, that's going to be a big focus really for the week, is this transition and industry. Right? Before we get to that, though, I'm going to pick on somebody. Pick on my buddy Dave here. Right? It is. Or Bradley. Yeah. Maybe I should pick on Andy. And, well, no, it's an easy one. Let me ask you a question. I have here well, let's be honest. It's a crappy wooden box. And I'm just now noticing some sort of suspicious brown goo. So here's my question. How much would you give me for this? Yeah. That's not bad. That's actually, that's not bad. I mean, it's reasonably well built. Addie, do you know what this is? That's not much of a jump. I don't know that challenges you. This is soapbox. And I don't know if you've ever heard of somebody when they start ranting, they say, "I'm getting up on my soapbox." That's what this is. It's a literal soapbox. It's well constructed at it. I mean, it holds my weight because from time to time I do go on a rant. When I do, I stand on my soapbox. That's why I have it. I can literally stand on my soapbox. Okay? All right, so Addie's going to give me $5. Addie, let me ask you this. What if you came in and instead of just this junky wooden box, it was covered in gold? Would you give me more than $5? I'm going to sell it to you for $5 if it's covered in gold. All right? Yeah. I'm not going to do it. All right? So here's the deal. Let's say Addie, she buys this box of gold. And she's feeling pretty good. She walks out. She gets out in the hallway and she trips over the stake of axe that fills the hallway. Okay? And she drops the box and hits the ground and it chips. And when Addie picks it up, she looks and she notices that it was just a layer of gold. But in reality, underneath it, it's just, a piece of crap wood. Right? And I'm counting the money. Now, why did I tell this somewhat ridiculous story? I promise you there's a method to my madness. I love the story of what we talked about in here. Within this time period, there was a guy named Samuel Clemens. He was an author. He was a really famous author. Now, none of you probably recognize that name, but you might recognize him by the name that he used when he was writing. Any of you ever heard of Mark Twain? All right. Mark Twain was in reality a guy named Samuel Clemens. And Mark Twain was a writer. He wrote like Huck Finn, wrote about Tom Sawyer. He wrote about all these things. And he was also somebody who was known for writing books that were called satire. All right, that was kind of like the genre of book that he wrote. Does anybody know what kind of book satire is? What kind of writing is satirical? What does that mean? Anybody have a guess? What do you think? Do I? Crude humor? It's definitely humor. I don't know that it's always crude. When I think of crude humor, I think of somebody making like a really nasty joke or something like that, right? I mean, that's not Mark Twain. And I don't really think it's humor. If you write with satire, you're writing like sarcastically. Okay, you're telling a story and it's kind of funny and you laugh about it, and then you stop and you actually think about it, and you realize that it's terrible. Right? What he's actually talking about. I mean, that's Mark Twain to a T. So Mark Twain wrote a book within this time period that he literally called The Gilded Age. That was the name of the book. And since we love to name time periods in U.S. history, remember before the Civil War, we had antebellum. And then we had the founding era. We have the roaring 20s that we'll look at when we get back from break. Here, we have the Gilded Age, which is this 25 years or so that we're studying. That's the way that Mark Twain described this time period. And remember, it's all about satire. So he's using this maybe as a joke, but in reality, he's describing just how terrible this time period really is. If something is gilded, it means that it's foreign. It's covered in gold. Yes. Right? If something is gilded, it's been covered in gold. Now, it could be anything. It could be a piece of crap wooden box. But it's been covered in a thin layer of gold, which makes it look as though it's really expensive and really valuable. But in reality, it's just a junky wooden box. All right? That's the way that, I mean, guys, think about it. Like, that's the way that Mark Twain describes this time. Okay? That's the way that he describes this time. By the way, does anybody know how Mark Twain, how that name came to be? Samuel Clemens grew up in Missouri. And more than that, he grew up on the Mississippi River. And that's I'll say a very wide river. It goes pretty deep. All right? And there's a lot of ships that make their way, a lot of barges that make their way up and down the river. But just like any river, there are times when the river will shallow out. And so a lot of youth that lived along the river in the 1800s, a lot of times they would make some money by getting hired onto a barge. The barge drivers would give these kids this long wooden pole, and the pole would be marked with lines. These would be lines that if you stuck it in the water would tell you how deep the water is. But they don't call them lines. They don't call it feet deep. They call them twains. A twain is a measure of depth on a river. And so if you were that kid, you would sit up there and they'd yell, they'd say, "Hey, kid, are we able to get through this little patch here? Is it too shallow?" You take the pole, you put it in the water, and he'd yell back, "Mark 5 twains." That meant it was 5 whatever deep, 5 twains deep. So he yelled that. I don't know how many times when he was a kid, and that's kind of how he got the name Mark Twain. Right? Mark Twain wrote this book, Gilded Age. He's using satire here. What he's describing is that there are a few people are a few people in this country that have a ridiculous amount of money. And if you were from, let's say, if you're from France and you come over to the United States and you take a look at some of those people, guys, we're going to be talking about Americans in the 1890s that are worth 1.4 billion with a B dollars. We did the math, fifth period. If that were today, we'd be talking about people worth over $40 billion. All right, that's a lot of money. So if you were to simply look at those people, you might say, go America. Right? You got these people making some serious cash. Well done, well done. But Twain is saying that's just the gilded layer. Beneath the few people with all that money is a majority, a vast majority of Americans that struggle to make ends meet. Now, this part, that'll be a big focus for us when we get back from break. What I want to do today is I want to talk about those people who were able to get that ridiculous amount of wealth. And as you can see here, I've given you 4 case studies. 4 case studies. 4 people that I think represent this gilded layer. And what I'm going to ask for you to do is answer 2 things for both, or for all 4. Number 1, this will be letter A. What is the focus of their wealth? Listen, guys, this is a time where there aren't a lot of banks. If you want to become rich, you've got to already have the money to get you started. Maybe you inherited it from your family. Maybe you got into the right business at the right time and were able to make a lot of money on it. But if you're going to make a lot of money at this time, you've already got to have it to get you started. So I want to know, this is letter A, what gave them the money at the start? At the beginning of their story, why did they already have a lot of money? And then letter B, how did they make more of it? Because that's the story here. Rich people getting richer. How'd they get rich? How'd they get richer? That's what you're looking for each of these guys. Right? Let's skip a couple things here. I think we can here. I can jump on ahead and try to get through this. Here are our cast of characters for today. Over here on the left with the ever impressive sideburns. We've got Cornelius Vanderbilt. He's the guy that we're going to talk about first. He comes first in the story. All right. Second in our story is this character, who was described as creepy during the 5th period. All I know is he's got a lot of money. All right, a lot of money. This is the guy that has the center named after him, where they've got the ice skating rink and the giant tree. John D. Rockefeller. All right. Now he's number 2. Number 3 will be this gentleman. He's the only story out of the 4 that I don't mind telling. He's kind of a good guy. He does a lot of good. He's the Scottish immigrant who comes in and starts making his money in steel. Talked about on Friday in the video. This Andrew Carnegie. And then last but not least, we got this guy who tends to get best known for his nose. Mario, huh? Mario a little bit, I can see it. This is J.P. Morgan. This is J.P. Morgan. All right? So these are our cast of characters, and remember, for all of them, I'm asking for 2 things from you. 1, how were they rich? 2, how did they get richer? That's A and that's B. Right? So we're going to look at them in chronological order, which means that we're going to start with Sideburns himself, Cornelius Vanderbilt. So here is A and B. I'm going to give you a little bit more depth, but Vanderbilt is one of these guys who gets into the right business at the right time. One of his buddies growing up is a guy named Robert Fulton. And that's nice because Robert Fulton invents the steamboat. I don't know if he invents the steamboat, but he builds the first American steamboat. Okay? And so Vanderbilt takes a little bit of money, buys a couple of steamboats, and what he originally does is he originally starts ferrying people from the East Coast out to California. And why would anybody in the 1840s want to move all the way out to California? Bingo. Bingo. There's gold out there. Remember we talked about the reason why San Francisco's football team is called the 49ers. Okay? 1849, we had the gold rush. So here's the deal. You know, if you live in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, wherever, and you want to make your fortune, and you want to head out to California to find gold, you have two options on how to get out there. Option number one, load you and your family, if you've got one, into a covered wagon, head across the countryside. Oh, that should be beautiful. Well, I remember when I was a kid, there was no game that I loved playing more than Oregon Trail. Any of you ever played Oregon Trail? Oh, I love that game. You can still find it on computer. And, I mean, that's the premise. You load your family up in a wagon. You're heading out west to Oregon. And it sounds like fun, but it was so hard that every time I made it to Oregon, I felt like I had really accomplished something. More often than not, I would be making my way to Oregon, and one of my oxen would break a leg, and I'd be screwed. Or a wagon wheel would break, and I didn't have a spare, so I'd be screwed. Or, you know, little Jimmy would get bitten by a snake and die. Or Becky would get cholera. More often than not, we tried to cross a river, and the river took us, and we all drowned. Moral of the story was, it's really hard to get from the East Coast to the West Coast by covering in a wagon. And I always think back to the story of the Donner family. Have you ever heard that story? Oh, it's a great story. Let me tell you the story. Okay, the Donner family were traveling with a group of other people heading out to California, and they thought they had it timed perfectly. They would make it through the Rocky Mountains and on to the other side before winter hit, and it would be great. Turns out they timed it horribly. They got to the Rocky Mountains just in time for winter, and the Rockies are not a place to get stuck in winter. So they get snowed in. I mean, they circle their wagons, and they just get snowed in into the Rockies. Nowhere to go for a couple of months until the snow melts. Food gets low. We do. We eat each other. Why not? You know. Okay. There were a few others. That's sort of the legend. But there's truth in that story. Several members of that party died, and their bodies were eaten, and that was the only way that people could survive. That's crossing from East Coast to West Coast. So Vanderbilt offers you an alternative to cannibalism, right? And Becky dying of cholera. Right? Why not jump on one of his steamboats, and you'll take it's a long journey. You got to go all the way around the southern tip of South America and back up. It's going to take a while. But, you're sailing south, so the weather's going to maybe be nice. It's going to be warmer. Might have some storms, but you can hug the coast pretty close. All right, ship sinks, you can sail ashore. You can step in for fresh water. It's safer, I think. It's safer. Just costs a lot of money. But that's how Vanderbilt makes his money. That's letter A. Makes his money through these steamboats. Once the Civil War breaks out, he starts to use those steamboats to move soldiers, to move supplies. He makes a lot of money from the government to do that as well. By the end of the Civil War, Cornelius Vanderbilt is doing all right for himself. Well, no. All right. So now the question is, how can I make more money? And he's going to go into railroads. Now, I want to be clear here. Vanderbilt does not invent the railroad. All right, there were railroads going all over the place long before Vanderbilt comes around. But those railroads were not safe. Right? A lot of these railroads were sort of smaller railroad companies. They didn't build the railroads very well. And more than that, they didn't pay attention to a little something called scheduling. And so what would often happen is you would have a train coming this direction. Nobody cared about letting this train wait for a bit. They would just set them off, and eventually, they'd collide. And it got to a point where a lot of people didn't want to ride these trains because they thought, well, we're going to die. Right? And it was a very real possibility. So here's what Vanderbilt does. He's a smart guy. He buys a lot of those failing railroads and improves the track. More than that, he starts to put them on a train schedule. It's simple stuff, guys. That's what he does. Now, everybody wants to ride these trains. I mean, really, if they're working right, it's the best way to get from east to west. That's how he makes his extra money, is get richer. And boy, does he get rich. By 1877, Cornelius Vanderbilt is the wealthiest man in America. There's nobody in the country who has more money than they. That's why he has those. Now, he's going to be the richest man in America for just a little bit. But I'll tell you, that family still has a ton of money, and most of the members of the Vanderbilt family have never worked a day in their lives. They're still living off of Cornelius's money. So the trick is to marry a Vanderbilt, okay, in your set. All right, so get to work on that, guys. Homework. All right, homework. Marry a Vanderbilt. All right, now, the guy who's going to knock Vanderbilt off of his perch as wealthiest man in America is John D. Rockefeller. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Rockefeller. Now, his letter A, quite frankly, his letter B for that matter, they're all tied together, comes down to a little something called oil. Oil. Now, prior to 1859, 1859 is a big year for oil. Prior to 1859, if you wanted to light your home, this is before the light bulb. If you want to light your home, you got a couple of different options. You can have a bunch of fireplaces, fill them with wood, constantly keep them going. In the summertime, that might be a problem. All right? In the wintertime, it's a lot of chopping wood. So we have candles, right? We have lanterns. Problem is candles, wax, I mean, you're just burning through candles, no pun intended. Burning through them. Get the joke? Okay. Okay. It was bad. I just want to make sure. So the other option would be like an oil lantern. But the only oil you've got is either A, kerosene, which is expensive and it burns really dirty. You're going to have a lot of sooty, nasty stuff. Or, you might know the other kind of oil that was extremely popular. I heard it, what? Whale oil. You'd go out, you'd kill a giant whale, and you would use the blubber to make oil. It's awful. Right? That's why we have so few whales, because we were just killing them left and right. Right? So the problem, though, with whale oil is, I mean, it's expensive. It's not easy to get. I mean, you literally have to go out in the ocean and kill a whale to get it. So it's not like you're just walking out in the backyard and turning on the faucet, and there we go. Right? So lots of problems with this. Everything changes. Listen. Everything changes in 1859. 1859, a guy named Edwin Drake, he's a farmer in Pennsylvania, a little town called Titusville. He's out in the field. He's digging, he's working in his field, and boom, he strikes oil. And it's not just a little bit of oil. It is the largest rock oil reserve in the United States. We have yet to find a bigger reserve of oil. And it's literally just spraying out of the ground. All right? You know, later on, we start mining. People start mining for oil. A few people find some. And if they do, they're probably going to be extremely wealthy. What most people did is they did what my family did. Old members of my family, ancestors of mine, a lot of them came up from Texas. On the way, they stopped in Oklahoma, bought a ton of land so that they could mine for oil. As far as I know, they're still doing it, and they had struck zero oil. Right? But you know, that land keeps coming down to me, and every time we have like a great aunt who dies, I get a little bit more of that land. So I keep open and strike oil. All right, if you ever see me just not show up one day and never teach again, or if you see me show up with these kinds of sideburns, you know, then you'll know I've struck oil. My family struck oil. All right, but honestly, folks, like that's the majority. People buy up all this land and then just having really big backyards. All right, that's it. That's really all that comes out of it. Right? So listen, here's the deal. If you mine oil, I mean, that's great, but you have a really low chance of finding it. If you do find it, I mean, it's a dirty job. John D. Rockefeller has no interest in getting dirty. He's going to focus on oil refining. You see, you can't just pull oil out of the ground and then stick it right in your car. Full of sediments, full of all sorts of nasty stuff. You got to pull that out. You got to refine that oil. So that's what Rockefeller does. He builds a huge oil refinery in Cleveland, Ohio. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever been to Cleveland. I don't know that I would call it the nicest town in America, but it's well placed. It's well placed for John D. Rockefeller. Now, he's from Ohio, so that helps. But he picked Cleveland for a reason. I want to show you a map. All right, showing you why Cleveland is so well placed for this oil refinery. The green line that you see up here on the screen is the second largest railroad in the United States. The red line is the largest railroad line in the United States. And what do you notice that they have in common? Both go through Cleveland. And not only that, believe it or not, there's a lot of shipping that takes place at the Great Lakes. Guess where Cleveland is? Right on the Great Lakes. So not only does he have the major railroads coming through town, but he's got all of this access to the Great Lakes. It is the perfect location for you to build this oil refinery. So he makes a lot of money refining oil. Trains need it. Right? Trains are eating this oil up. So he's making a lot of money there. And what he decides to do is to take that money and to buy every single other oil refinery in the country. Why would he do that? What? Bingo. What's that mean, Austin? He controls it. He has no competition. And when you have no competition, what can you do? What's that? But everything. Okay, specifically? Yeah, you can charge whatever you want, right? Because there's nobody that's going to undercut you. There's nobody that's going to sell things for less than you. You can set it for whatever you want. So his letter A would be oil. His letter B would be oil, but specifically the monopoly that he creates. Right? He builds a company called Standard Oil, which, by the way, is still around today. And it is a refining monopoly. So he's got this. This is what I love. He's got this monopoly built by 1900, just in time for the automobile to become a thing, which requires oil. Hey, that worked out. That worked out well. So what that means is if you're a railroad or if you're an automobile manufacturer, you're going to have oil, which means you have to go through John D. Rockefeller. Right? That's why you get to have giant towers and big centers with skating rinks named after. Right? You have monopoly. All right, let me mention Carnegie real quick. No, never mind. I'm not going to. Got 5 minutes. All right. Tomorrow I'll go through Carnegie and J.P. Morgan real quick. By the way, if you think this guy's got money, wait till we get to J.P. Morgan. He laughs at his bank account. Right? Omar. Hey, keep these notes. Don't throw them away. I didn't tell you.